So today's session is about aligning business and nature. 2026 is shaping up to be a defining year for business nature strategies. And this session explores a fascinating question about how business and nature can align. How do we unlock business opportunities with nature? This session is hosted by Natcap, and I have here with me, and please join me welcoming our speakers and guests, Sebastian Leape, CEO Natcap, Beccy Wilebore, Chief Science Officer Natcap, Tony Goldner, CEO TNFD, and Peter Lukassen, Director of Sustainability, Bosch GmbH. Please welcome. There you go.
Good morning. A very warm welcome to you all. How are we going to divide our time today? I will give you a few slides, just a short overview of what we mean by opportunities for nature and business. We'll then do an interactive survey with you, so be prepared because it is going to be interactive and we'll be asking you questions. And then the majority of our time is going to be spent in a panel discussion and then a Q&A, because I know that most of you, that's why you're here, you have questions to ask and we want to get into a discussion. So I'll start with a short overview and then we'll dive in. So what do we mean when we talk about opportunities for business and nature? Late last year, the TNFD published an excellent report or a discussion paper on opportunities for business and nature. We talk about a framework which discusses two sides. So one is benefits for nature, and this can be on the reduction of impact drivers on nature, so you can be reducing the harm on nature, or you can be improving the state of nature. And both of those are ultimately steps towards nature-positive outcomes and align with the global biodiversity targets. And the other half of that equation is positive outcomes for business. And these can be financial and they can also be non-financial as well. So these can be about changing your business model. They can be about competitive edge or license to operate. So thinking about that business side of the equation a little bit more, here are some of the benefits to businesses from working with nature. Some of those can be about operational efficiency and resilience. This is one pathway to benefits for nature, benefits for business. So it can be simply improving the efficiency of your business model, cost savings, and ultimately then reducing your impact on nature. It can also be about new products and services and new markets and opening up new opportunities for the business. It can be about resilience in your supply chain, particularly in a changing world, and understanding how to shore up key commodities, key products that are essential for your business. It can be about business model innovation as well, so doing something different that you've not done previously. Or financial innovation, and there are some interesting financial products that are coming out, both to enable nature-positive transition and also to invest in some of these nature opportunities. I'm going to talk through just a couple of examples of each one of these to kind of paint a picture so that it gives you an idea of the kind of range of opportunities that we're going to be talking about. So on operational efficiency and resilience, Decathlon, for example, have been leaning heavily into their circular economy. And it's one of the fastest growing parts of their business is their circular sales. So representing about 3% of overall revenue, but grew more than 10%, 2013 to 2014. On other companies, so food and beverage companies, water is a huge factor for a beverage company. And most of the large beverage companies have water replenishment targets now to either fully replenish their water supplies or leave them in a better state than they found them. Suntory, AB InBev, CCEP, Diageo all have these. On new markets, biomimicry is a topic which many companies are looking at, and it's something that we're quite passionate about on the panel, so do ask us questions on that. So an example might be Sparkcell, and this is called out in the TNFD report. This is a company that is revolutionizing how pigments are made. Pigments are often based on oil-based products. They're hard to recycle. And this company is using natural sort of feedstock and a very recyclable product, and kind of really innovating in this space and doing that based on how pigments are made in nature. So supply chain resilience, lots of examples here. But Kraft Heinz is one example where they've been investing in precision agriculture and regenerative practices for their farmers, particularly tomato farmers in Spain, and seeing both a reduction in inputs, so a cost reduction, but also an increase in yield as well. Natcap is a British company, and they are innovating business models. Here they are opening up markets for ecosystem service payments. These are driven partly by regulation and partly by voluntary markets, but their business exists because they're looking to move to a sort of nature-positive economy and helping companies to find those opportunities. And then lastly, financial innovation. So lots here. We can talk as well about the role of financial institutions versus corporates as well in our discussion. But the role of financial institutions can be as enablers. So we look at sort of blue bonds, green bonds, that kind of thing. And corporates as well can innovate in this space. So Natura, for example, is a company that has issued bioasset bonds. And for them, it's about supply chain resilience. It's about ensuring that their suppliers are available to them and providing them with high quality and sustainable products. And this is a sort of home goods company. That has painted, hopefully, a little picture of what we mean by nature opportunities and business opportunities. I'm going to hand over to Seb now. We're going to ask you a few questions in the Mentimeter survey. And we will come to you to maybe get some insights into why you answered the way that you did. So this is our QR code. Scan that. That should bring up the Mentimeter survey. And then work through those answers, and then we'll bring up some of your answers on the screen. Over to you, Seb.
Alrighty. Thanks, Becky. Good morning. So I'm Sebastian Leape. I'm the CEO here at Natcap. Maybe worth just saying a few words about what Natcap does to start off. So we're a nature intelligence company, and that means we help corporates measure the impacts they have on nature, how they're dependent on nature, and how that translates into business risks. And the real innovation that we focus on is building data products that quantify that in a way that is specific to where and how companies operate. So getting to specific, ideally site level, but regional levels where that's not appropriate or available, information to allow you to then build the business case for action. And companies increasingly, following the rapid adoption of TNFD, are starting to measure their interaction with nature in this way to enable external reporting frameworks, but more importantly, to unlock internal business opportunities, which is what we're going to be discussing here, either to mitigate risk or to unlock new revenue-generating opportunities. So that's a bit about what we do. We do both the data products and the advisory work alongside that. Originally spawned out of the University of Oxford, so have always invested heavily in the science and in the innovation to allow that data to be as accurate and as specific as possible. And the last 3-4 years have been a real transformative period for the corporate sustainability movement as nature has gathered rapid momentum. So we're going to be going deeper in that today in our panel. But before that, we always find it useful just to learn a bit more about who's in the room and who we're speaking to. So if you wouldn't mind pulling up this QR code on your phone, and then we're going to work our way through some of these questions to see who is in the room. So if I press next, will that start the Mentimeter? Let's see what happens. Oh, oops, I think I've gone too far. Okay, here. So folks have pulled up the QR code. You should be able to just select where you come from and which kind of organization you represent. So that helps us figure out how to tailor this discussion. So it looks like we have a really good mix in here. So about about a quarter from the non-profit space, a quarter from corporate sustainability, marketing and sales, finance, and then some executive positions. Okay, interesting. So we'll keep that in mind as we start the discussion. It looks like there's a chunk of sustainability, corporate sustainability, but actually a range of other functions in there as well. So that's useful to know. Maybe if we move on to the next question here. So based on the framing that Beccy just laid out, so TNFD has been thinking about nature opportunities in these buckets. Where have you experienced and where would you focus your attention first as a company to capture the nature-related opportunities? And maybe if you just vote across these 6 themes, and let's see if we get any trends starting to emerge. Okay, they're coming in. So it looks like a pretty even split across all 5. Okay, so I guess we're not going to pull out any major trends here, apart from it sounds like we're all in agreement that everything is important and there are opportunities everywhere, which is, I think it's an exhilarating and exciting way to set up the conversation. Okay, so slightly more on supply chain resilience, which aligns certainly with how I've seen our clients think about the nature agenda. The two, if you wind back a year, the investment and the business case for nature came from reporting and regulation. EU was bringing in mandatory regulation, the TNFD was gathering rapid steam, and budgets were being unlocked for that reporting lens. And I think over the last 6 to 9 months, that lens has changed, and we are seeing supply chain security become much more prominent, as are some of the other kind of levers for value creation. So that aligns with what we're seeing. Okay, let's see. Okay, what regulatory changes would you like to see to unlock nature opportunities? And I think that's a bit of the elephant in the room that we'll come to, is that you can unlock some opportunity with the status quo economic model, but then there's regulation needed to really unlock all of them. So what are them? So tax incentives, that's clearly where we're seeing the most interest. What else do we have here? Accountability, reduction of consumption, faster permitting. Okay, I'm going to turn to the room now. Would someone very brave who put tax incentives, accountability, reduction of consumption, any of those big 3 themes, would someone be able to share a bit more about what they meant when they wrote that down? Oh, sorry, you just got to...
Still Isabel Devan at the Carbon Trust. I wrote tax incentives because I think that businesses need that carrot rather than a stick, and this is very, very important. So I think what we need to do is make sure that there is sufficient, credible benefit in the short term to help with that long-term incentive.
Can you say more? Did you have a specific tax incentive in mind, or where would you put the public money?
I think it's just about the same as, I used to work in renewables, for example, and what we found is that oil and gas had so many tax incentives for just like buying vehicles, buying things. So I think if you actually have tax incentives for companies investing in areas that are unlocking nature opportunities, that is actually going to increase, because they have to be making their own investments. So if at least they can get something back. I mean, businesses are in it for the money, so they need to have something that gives it in the long term.
Makes a lot of sense. Do we have another brave soul who will share why they put what they did?
Hi, my name is Karim, and I work with innovation in business model for a more sustainable world. I think that all that I work with shows me that the big difficulty is exactly on the system right now, because the system is set in support to what we know to do, which was what we have been doing for 200 years. Therefore, the incentives, as well put, are in the wrong place. And I totally agree with that. We need to shift to give benefits to the ones doing the right thing and tax the ones that are damaging our planet and our health. So that's the reason I put it there. Thank you.
Makes a lot of sense. Anyone else want to share their perspectives before we move on? Oh, we've got someone in the middle.
I also believe that tax incentives is a really strong tool, and it also makes sense because when company create pollution, destruction, this also impact different areas, including health, including social aspects that actually afterwards the taxes go to kind of repair, restore, regenerate. So this way, from the beginning, we actually support more sustainable approaches, and then we avoid repairing and regenerating, expending costs for that. So even economically looking on a long term, actually it really makes sense. And then of course for the companies, this will be a really strong drive. We know how the business works these days, and always it has been working. So it is time to really support with such tools.
And did you have any specific tax incentives in mind that you'd prioritize?
It's a lot, like, for example, plastic waste. If we stimulate companies to do better, because afterwards we have to manage all this destruction and damage, and we have to pay for it. So we don't really always do it. It's still based on, but we have gone too far already with health impact, with environment, everything, which plastic pollution. So if we manage to actually company that do better on that aspect to stimulate, it's also CO2 pollution. It's a lot of examples that we can bring, of course.
Thank you. Okay, so a lot of interest in tax incentives, accountability mechanisms, and then how do we just reduce demand and consumption? So if we move on, I think there's one final question. Let me just see if this... could I get a little help moving on to the next slide? Oh, was that the final question?
Yeah.
That was the final question. I was joking. That was one of our well-rehearsed pranks. All right, so we're done with the interactive part. We're going to do a brief panel discussion and then open it back up for questions. But thank you.
Thanks, Seb. Maybe I'll start with a positive question to kind of kick us off. Maybe starting with you, Tony. Which opportunity are you most excited about, and why for business?
I hope, there we go, it's working. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And most exciting opportunity, well, I'm a big biomimicry fan, and also a fungi fan. So we were just talking about the dinner last night around fungi and changing the world. So, I think what's exciting for me is we've got to start working with nature, not just treating it as an input. So how does its regenerative and restorative capacity become a source of opportunity for us? So in my mind, that leads us to finding elements in nature that regenerate incredibly quickly, like fungi, for example. How do we use that? There's some extraordinary examples of mycelium, the roots of fungi being used in furniture and the built environment and things like that, packaging solutions. And the fact that it generates so quickly means that we can cultivate it and have a sort of self-generating supply of materials, right? Seaweed in the oceans, seaweed being used obviously for things like food, but there are people now experimenting with seaweed for clothing. So I'm really excited about finding those kind of opportunities, because it's very clear that the industrial development system that we've built over the last 200 years is sort of, we all know, extracting materials, but a lot of them don't regenerate particularly quickly. And so we've got this problem of matching our demand for those resources with the ability of nature to regenerate the supply of what we're looking for, timber being a great example. So maybe I'll stop there, but I'm excited about mushrooms and seaweed and things like that. Maybe even insects for protein. I know that's controversial, but fast-generating sources of nature for things that we need.
Yeah, amazing. And Peter, when we're all talking outside of business, right? Talking kind of generalities and nice opportunities, but inside a large business, how do you think about nature opportunities for Bosch, and what are the ones that you're most excited about at the moment?
Well, you mentioned we are a big company, and I'm responsible in the mobility aftermarket division, so I'm mainly talking in automotive projects, and most excited at the moment we are, and you mentioned it already for Diageo, for us in automotive, is circular economy. Circular economy is not a new topic, it's around for quite some time, but it's really scaling up right now. We are already doing 400 million in turnover with it. And other than regenerating, of course, everything which you avoid taking out of nature is a benefit. And with manufacturing, you just save 80-90% of material. So this is a clear, good topic. It's a good business topic, and it's also easy to sell in the end. But there are also, of course, a lot of softer factors in where we try to build the business cases and just start the development. And this is water, also a topic which is measurable. And there is a lot you can do, but you really can do on the individual site level. You can show to your employees, and there are also a lot of good business cases in. We are talking about payback times of 2 years at about. So this is also loves, of course, the CFO in a company. 2 years payback is good. And then we just received a prize for biodiversity also at our site. We want really to make the places where our workers are coming, and we need also to put a little bit of more incentive on getting them back to work, more agreeable for them, have nice recreational zones. And there you can also have bees and all kind of other biodiversity topics in. And by the way, oftentimes it even saves your maintenance costs.
And you were talking about making the business case there, so maybe we jump to that. And, you know, same question to the whole panel, really. But how have you managed to make that business case for nature? And is it always straightforward? You're talking about, you know, conversations with the CFO. How do you put nature in those terms that is compelling?
Well, of course, if you start with something new, there is no budget, there is no program, there is no initiative. And on the other hand, especially if you talk about sustainability and nature, we, in all big companies and everywhere in society, we have a lot of enthusiasts. We have people who have ideas, and then it is, for me, the challenge is to find those enthusiasts and have some small cases, some small pilots where I can show with a little invest about we can change something. And these are then basically the champions which you can put on a platform. We have internal competitions, which are then also globally available to participate for all employees. And when you build those champions and you just promote it and also show that with a little invest you can do something, then it starts to get moving in the different sites. And then you can also come to your CFO and tell, look, I spent 20,000 K on this and I had a return of 50,000. We have 400 sites in the world. Let's just have the ambition to do it in 50 of them. And then next year we can roll it out. So you have to do step by step, and you have to have those positive lighthouse projects, those positive things which do not have to be huge, but they have to be measurable and they have to be clear. And if you then also have this culture of individuals who have good ideas, that they get the stage basically to present their ideas, this helps, of course, them to also to progress. They have a lot of incentive to even think further.
This is a long-term project, basically. Yeah,
exactly. And then you can also have a program and really feed by each year a little bit more of resources into it.
That's really interesting. And is that what you've seen as well, Seb, in terms of making the business case with companies that we work with?
Well, I think over the last few years, there's been a shift in language of focusing not just on the opportunity for nature, but on the opportunity for nature and business with a given initiative. I think whether that's reducing your costs, growing revenues, increasing resilience, that's how you ground it. I think one thing that is an important element of a compelling business case also is the payoff period, which is that a lot of companies are looking for increasingly small payoff periods for initiatives in the nature space. And I think also unwilling to make long-term commitments. I think what we saw in the climate journey was 2030, 2050 targets that were set early in the journey. They felt a long way away. As that date approached, executives realized that it was going to be more difficult than they thought. And then there's been some backpedaling which benefited no one. And so I think there's a desire to avoid those same mistakes in the nature journey. And so we have a more rigorous set of criteria before nature initiatives are adopted than maybe was the case in other times. So yes, it's really about identifying where you can generate that business value. And then I think there's also something about just sharing information of success, which is important here, which is we don't have that many case studies of nature risk being financially material and of nature opportunities leading to revenue generation, cost reduction and resilience increases. We have, we're in the tens, but we're not in the thousands of compelling case studies. And so I think another really important part of building the business case is showing how peers are acting and creating this sense of comfort that other folks are doing this, and then also start to create that fear of missing out, that, if you don't move now, your peers will move, and in a few years you'll be far behind. So there is both the language of framing it in financial and commercial language. There's making sure the time frames are short enough, and then there's bringing in peer examples to create a bit of FOMO. And I think as we start to have more nature shocks, we all lose, because it means that we're at the extremes of our planetary boundaries, and we're on the downward curve that we've all been fearing. But it does mean we have more ammunition from a case study perspective to create the case for change. So those are some of the trends I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because there's a few different things that could be blocking us there. And Tony, maybe I'll come to you. If the slides I showed at the beginning painted a picture that there's this big opportunity for nature in business, I guess the question is, if the opportunity is so big, why are we not seeing financial flows in the way that we might expect? Is it some of the reasons that we've just discussed, or is it something else?
Yeah, well, I think there's many different aspects to that. I think to your point, Sebastian, one of the key things is everyone likes to be first, but they don't really like to be first. They want to be kind of what I'd call a fast follower, not necessarily the pioneer, right? So they want somebody else to try it and take the risk. If it works, then everyone piles in. So I do think we have a challenge right now there's a lot of interest in nature-related opportunities. Everyone's looking for those case studies. And the good news is there's actually a book, and I can see Andrew Mitchell here in the audience. There's a book coming out in the next couple of months called The Little Book of Nature Business, which is going to have plenty of opportunities, plenty of case studies by different sectors. So it's a good complement to the kind of cross-cutting thematic a view of this, which you just shared from our work. So everyone wants examples. Everyone wants to see someone who's done it first. They want to know that they've made money, and then I think the momentum will build. So we've got to get the flywheel turning. But I think one of the other key challenges is, to your point, CFOs are looking at the dollars and the cents, but there is actually a broader value proposition for the business, right? So, and some of these things are hard to quantify, so they get sort of downgraded or deprioritized. So what's the benefit to customer loyalty or customer retention if you're investing in these things and your products have a lighter footprint on the planet, or they're doing something positive for nature? That resonates with customers, right? And increasingly in competitive markets, this can be a factor in consumer choice. What impact does it have on your license to operate? Right, so we often only price these things when a crisis happens and you lose your license to operate. Then suddenly it's the most important, most valuable thing in the company. But you only recognize that value when you've just lost it, right? And you're playing catch up. So I think it's partly about, obviously it has to stack up from a financial perspective, and payback periods are really important. But I think we've got to try and get business leaders to be thinking about this holistically and thinking about what are all of the dimensions of the value proposition to the company. If we can ascribe a dollar value to those, that would be great. But I think it's sort of moving in that direction. But I think early wins, seeing what others have done, celebrating their small successes, scaling quickly, learning, iterating, and scaling quickly is really the key here.
And is it also about maybe training CSOs a little bit to think about the value proposition to the company outside of what they've traditionally thought about? I remember a conversation with a CSO recently, and he said, look, none of this is particularly sexy. Like, no CSO has ever really won a prize for, cost reduction. But that is actually the value proposition to the business. And I was wondering, from your perspective, Peter, is that kind of how you've had to think about?
I think, especially in sustainability, we should step a little bit aside of just focusing on CSOs. Mm-hmm. So what I really find very Well, helpful is that within Bosch, I think 2 years ago, we started dedicated sustainability training for all of our top executives. So no matter if you are finance, if you are accounting, if you are sales, if you are manufacturing, you will get a sustainability training to understand how everything in the end is interrelated. And we do not have to have a general training for financial figures. So everybody knows, okay, EBIT and financial resilience and how does it in the end works. But the short and especially long-term impacts which you have with sustainability, these you have to raise this awareness. And this program is now running for 1.5 years, and it makes also much easier for me to speak with the board, to speak with different sections within Bosch about these topics. So it's a lot about awareness and bringing this knowledge and this self-understanding to basically the whole general management. And also within my division, I made basically all the sustainability general trainings mandatory for all indirect employees, no matter what function. They will all have, every 2 years, they will have a whole program of 4 modules, and those modules will be constantly updated. It's not too long, but just basically enough to make them aware about how we need to move forward in a comprehensive way.
That's really interesting. So basically embedding sustainability across the business. Yeah.
If I can come into your earlier question on why are we not seeing more business activity and capturing this opportunity agenda, I think there's one interesting point that's come up recently in some of the work we've been doing with clients, which is one of the main drivers for capturing nature-related opportunities is to mitigate risk. That's one of the main reasons why you'd invest and one of the main sources of value. And how you calculate that risk really matters. And I've seen a few companies, run some basic, simple risk assessments and come up with some quite small numbers, or come up with some non-material findings for some key nature-related risks. And actually, if you think about the systemic risk and if you project out that risk into the future, often those numbers are a gross underestimate. So, for example, if you are estimating if you're looking at commodity security of supply for a given commodity in Brazil, an ecosystem shock in a particular region in Brazil might not be that impactful for your business if you can easily, source from another region in Brazil. But there's a systemic element there, which is that if one ecosystem in Brazil is having a shock, it's quite likely that many ecosystems in Brazil will have a shock, and then you start to see serious global implications for supply and demand for that given commodity. And so I think the way that we do the nature risk modeling really matters, so that we're capturing the full systemic potential risks that we face, and playing out how markets would react when those risks occur. And I think when you take that approach, you see that some of the risks we face are really quite material and really significant.
Just to add to that, I think we in a way, our mindset that we've built now around climate and thinking about looking forward to climate change, all the models are sort of showing, these linear lines that sort of go up, but they're pretty smooth curves, right? They don't really take into account on the nature side what we'd call tipping points. So this rapid deceleration or change in the state of nature is not something that we've been trained to think about. And a lot of people are just copying and pasting their mindset from, I call it carbon tunnel vision or climate tunnel vision. We're sort of applying that to the rest of nature, and in a way it doesn't really work. And so I think it's a really important sort of mindset shift that we have to bring about in order to get people to think about nature risk differently from, or non-climate nature risk differently from climate risk.
Should we pull on that thread a little bit more? If people are coming to this session and they, they're already familiar with climate, what is the difference with nature, nature opportunities? What are some of those other differences that they should be thinking about? So the non-linearity, is there anything else?
Well, I think it starts with a really comprehensive assessment of what your dependencies and impacts on nature are, and that's where the TNFD work starts. Everyone's got dependencies in their business. Most businesses are completely blind to what those dependencies are. I mean, obviously, if you're in the beverage sector, you understand you have acute dependency on nature's ability to provide water into your products. But I can't tell you from all of our work at TNFD over the last 4 or 5 years, the number of businesses who start doing an assessment of their impacts and dependencies and have these sort of wow moments where they realize there's these critical dependencies underpinning their cash flows and their revenues. So I think it really does start with a comprehensive understanding of your impacts and dependencies underpinning the drivers of cash flow, drivers of revenue, of supply chain, provision of materials through your supply chains. Once you start to understand that, you can start then to figure out where are the resilience gaps or weaknesses in our supply chains and in our business model as a whole, and then that informs an identification of the opportunities and across those 5 or 6 types that we showed.
But it is confusing that we started with the climate agenda and now are moving into a nature agenda, because nature is the broader category. Climate is one of the drivers that is contributing to nature loss, but other drivers are excessive resource consumption, pollution, not just greenhouse gas pollution, but soil, air, water, noise pollution, invasive species, land use change. So it's a broader category, and I think many businesses have had tunnel vision on carbon, and so when they start to look at how they're impacting the world in those other ways, it unlocks a whole suite of new opportunities that are worth pursuing.
Yeah, often more cost efficient than trying to pursue them separately as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, I can see you.
The other issue is switching costs,
Yeah.
right? Which I'm sure, Peter, you could speak to. But a lot of companies just assume, well, if things are looking bad in this location, we'll just switch to another location. We'll move out of there and source our water or our forest products or something from somewhere else. And of course, that's an option. But increasingly, I think companies are going to get called out if they just walk away from a landscape where they've been having an impact for a long period of time and just go and start sourcing from somewhere else. And also, there can be very, very substantial costs in having, as we learnt from COVID and other impacts, there can be very substantial business costs associated with having to switch your supply chain base. So again, these things are often not factored in until the moment when they have to happen. And so I think it's really instructive to be trying to build models, decision models within companies that build these different aspects in, because I think it would substantially improve the business case for embracing nature-related opportunities, particularly resilience through the supply chain.
I think the switching cost point is a really important one, and one thing we've learned from our interaction with different actors is who in the ecosystem is most incentivized to capture nature opportunities, and it's the folks who have no switching opportunity at all. The landowners, the ultimate owners of the land, they are the most incentivized to ensure that you are getting ahead of potential risks to maintain and grow your asset value. So there is an asset owner's point, and their need and are being mobilized. And then there's a kind of inverse relationship between how hard it is to switch and how interested you are in investing to mitigate the impacts, dependencies, risks that you've identified. And so if you're sourcing from a very deep, very liquid market like soy through a commodity trader and buying small volumes, your incentives are different to someone who's buying a much less liquid commodity or mineral from a market where they can't switch very easily. And so I think there is value when you're thinking about which opportunities should I be prioritizing for my company, where do I sit in that spectrum of how tied am I to particular pockets of land, how tied am I to particular suppliers, and starting there, because you'll probably have the strongest incentive for action with those relationships.
And to your point earlier, these systemic risks mean that assumption that you can switch might not hold in the future, right? There's only so many places that you can grow cocoa, and when there's a large-scale drought, then that's going to affect the whole market.
And I think there's a thread there, which is with the TNFD and the work that we've done, a lot of the sustainability movement has taken a company-first approach to measuring and managing and mitigating nature risk, which I think does make sense. But increasingly, there is also this landscape level perspective, which is important. And I think seeing some of these impact dependency risk assessments run at the landscape and at the ecosystem level will be important to get the right group together to incentivize real change. Because as we're discussing, some individual companies, if their switching costs are low, aren't as incentivized to change as a group of companies sourcing from a given region who all are fully invested in that region.
Peter, I can see you nodding along. Did you want to come in on any of that?
Yeah, well, because we have these interdependencies, and we can see that a lot of different levers are currently just before or even beyond the critical tipping points. And looking then only from one perspective might not turn out to be then a well-known business case, or do not turn the wheel in the end. But when you understand that the risks are interrelated, then you can also step by step understand that the measures or the levers which we can pull are interrelated. And just circling back on circular economy, this is one of the levers which is possibly correlated with all of the sustainable development goals. So you can find those cases, and then you cannot only put one factor where you increase, but you can put other factors in. Supply chain resilience, major driver to decouple is circular economy. This is also very hard to assess financial risk. Switching costs, yes, if you source a lot of your material from that one area, you have a high dependency on this, then reduce it. And there is also not the possibility to just build a plant everywhere, and then, yes, I can switch, because you can switch the machines, but you cannot easily switch the know-how. So in one of my former roles, I had to relocate a spark plug manufacturing facility. It just takes 1.5 to 2 years to have all the machines running and everything works fine, but it takes 5 years until you have the know-how in your workforce again, and to have the quality and everything. And so switching cost, it might be an easy fail if you just think, well, I just need to invest some money. No, this does not work in a complex supply chain. So we have to become resilient in the places which we are. There is no other possibility. And also, not everybody can just move to this one holy grail where everything is fine. No, it does not work. And your customers, by the way, they also cannot easily switch. So this is also a major risk in the end in this whole equation.
And are you taking other measures about, your operational sites and resilience where they currently are? I think you were talking about water, for example. Yeah. What are the other measures that you're taking to be resilient in your operating sites?
The other thing is that, of course, you to have alternative sources. So this is basically all the supply chain things which we have to think about. But also, of course, other measures in the sites which we are. This is a little bit tricky because it's not as easy as you can measure water or energy consumption. But if you invest in your site, for example, with the whole landscaping and everything around, then you also invest in the health and the motivation of your staff. And this is, of course, something at what we are looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Should we talk a bit about enabling factors as well? Because we asked the audience at the beginning, if there were a regulation that you could change or an enabling factor, what would you like to see? And we heard tax incentives was a big one. But for the panel, are there some enabling factors and regulations that you would love to see that you think would really unlock these opportunities?
I think there's an elephant in the room, which is the current economic system doesn't price many ecosystem services, and so there's always going to be a ceiling in that environment, how far individual corporate actors can go to mitigate their impacts and dependencies and risks. So addressing that through a combination of kind of taxes and subsidies would be one of the systemic levers you can pull. But I think more practically, if we take that as a bit hard to achieve, more practically, one thing that is really prominent in our work is that the most pressing nature risks that come out from assessment. So if we take physical water risk as an example, that's often the most material nature risk that many companies face. Mobilizing to actually mitigate that risk requires water basin level coordination. At the water basin level, you have to measure how much water can be supplied sustainably, you have to measure how much is being consumed, and then you have to allocate that consumption across all the actors who are in that water basin. And you need a coordinating actor to coordinate that change and to run that assessment. And for individual corporates, it can be done, and it has been done with palm oil and with some commodities, but it's really tricky because there's antitrust to worry about, there's low trust between competitors, there's all kinds of barriers to change. So I think the role of local governments in the nature opportunity space has been under-discussed and undervalued, and they are the natural actor who should be coordinating at the landscape or the water basin level what is the carrying capacity of that ecosystem and how to allocate rights across it. And I think we don't really have much in the way of a national conversation as to what does that role look like, how is it resourced, and what powers does it need to be able to play that role really effectively. So I'd love to see the leading countries start to think about what local government needs to look like to capture nature positive opportunities.
Maybe I can just build on that with a very practical example. So one story I've been watching closely for the last couple of years is and we just have to walk down the street to see all the AI shop fronts that have taken over Davos, is the boom in semiconductor fab plants and data centers, right? So it's one of the big global stories right now. Trillions of dollars being invested in the build out of data centers and fabrication plants. Today we're actually, in about an hour's time, we're publishing a draft of technology sector guidance, specifically on these issues, nature-related issues for the technology sector. But we'll be publishing a really interesting case study on semiconductor and data centers as well. So keep your eye out for that. But I think just zooming into the Western United States is a classic example unfolding in front of our eyes of what Sebastian was just saying, which is, how are local governments and state governments in the United States going to bring long-term nature risk higher up into their decision criteria as they attract these hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment? The Wall Street Journal is doing a very good job of handing out free copies of the paper around Davos. So I've read it this morning, and there's a big story on the inside cover about what's happening at the moment with TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturer. So today's paper says they're going to Taiwan's investing $250 billion in the United States. Most of that will go into the Western United States in terms of new plants. I think TSMC is going to go to 12 plants. And that area, the whole Colorado River Basin, all of that area is already under incredible water stress. You've got 7 states fighting over water rights in the Western United States. You've got these hundreds of billions of dollars coming in to build plants. And of course, the states need that investment. They want that investment. They don't generate a huge number of jobs, but it's obviously bringing a lot of capital into the states. And so I think it's going to be really challenging, particularly in the world that we're living in now, to make this trade-off between development priorities and the pursuit of competitiveness and investment, particularly in the technology sector and these water-stressed areas. And so I think we're going to see this unfold in the tech sector in the Western United States, which is already under extreme water stress. And I went out to Colorado a couple of years ago, 2 years ago with TNFD, and we met a brewery in the Western United States. And they said, our whole license to operate depends on the local community supporting the brewery, and we would have absolutely no right to produce beer and truck it out past our local community if they don't have access to water. So they recognize that even if they have senior water rights, which for a lot of companies gives them a sense of priority and a sense of security around a key resource, this particular brewery recognized that those water rights will mean nothing in an extreme scenario where you lose the support of the community that provides your workforce and so much else that you depend on. So I think these issues are coming really into sharp focus, particularly in this AI tech boom that we're in the middle of right now.
If I can add, I couldn't agree more. And if I add a national government request on my local government request, I think another thing we've seen, particularly in densely populated European countries, is national governments commit finite land multiple times over for different uses. So if you add up the amount of land we need to meet house building targets, with renewable energy deployment targets, with conservation areas to meet 30 by 30, with areas set aside for industrial development, there is more land that's committed than exists particularly in Western Europe and some Asian countries. And so I think there is a national government enabling factor, which is a land use strategy of how do we allocate land in the optimal way to maximize economic, environmental and social outcomes that the government wants to see. And that has to require some land set aside for conservation and for and for biodiversity, but it requires some difficult trade-offs across these different use cases, which at the moment we're just ignoring. And the problem with ignoring it is you end up with suboptimal outcomes, because at the very local level, whoever has the most power at an individual site, whether that's a powerful company or a powerful politician looking to advance a particular project, that will go ahead. But the aggregate is a misallocation of land, which prevents us from achieving our kind of nature goals and the other outcomes we care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one enabling factor which we missed out so far, and I haven't looked through all the points, but I haven't seen on it, is besides taxes and incentives and also general plans how to develop areas, it's also standards. Because I'm also active for quite some years in an automotive initiative which is called Casina X, in which we are looking at a lot of data exchange patterns, and I was very active also in the area of how to calculate the carbon footprint of products. So there is an ISO norm, but in the end, if you look currently at companies, there are so many factors which you can apply that it is simply not comparable if two companies are providing the same calculation based on the same norms. So we are currently also in exchange with UNEP from the Casina X that there will be a common standard. And even more for all the other nature dimensions, in order to have within the supply chain, we all have independent decision makers making their decisions. To give them the educated choice, we have to apply also some standards on how those figures are created, that really they are comparable, that it might look the one is 50% lower, but they just calculated on a different assumption base, and indeed it is absolutely higher. So this is one factor where currently a lot of discussions are ongoing. It's incredibly difficult in the end, but once we have those standards, and even if they are at the beginning rather rough, once we have a really sound base which is rough but which is comparable, we can see that in the supply chain, all these individual decision makers, they can make much better choices than now, where a lot is based on your own assumptions about your supply chain, because you cannot really compare those figures.
Part of standardization as well is having a good framework, which of course TNFD has done a lot of work on as well.
And just on the metrics point, you're exactly right. There's the issue still with the methods for measuring things. Yep. And at COP30, we proposed a nature measurement protocol building on the GHG protocol, and that work is getting underway. It'll be led by the Nature Positive Initiative and WBCSD, who of course were involved in the GHG protocol. So there is a recognition, though, now that even if the metrics are clear, and TNFD's provided a lot of clarity on what should be measured around dependencies and impacts, we still have work to do around the measurement methodologies that sort of sit at the bottom of the measurement architecture, if you like. Right? We need people to be counting and measuring things in the same way, so that investors and capital allocators, banks and insurers can be looking at apple-to-apple comparisons and making the most efficient capital allocation decisions.
Yeah.
And as that work starts to get underway, I hope that we avoid the mistake of the GHG protocol, which is under fire at the moment for double counting, which I'm sure you've seen. And so how do we then make sure that the nature protocol doesn't face that same trap? That will be important.
I'd love to come to the audience, because we've been talking for a while now, and I know that you will also have questions. So we've got lots of time for Q&A, so hopefully we'll get through all of it. And we have a first question over here on the side.
So I represent an investor community. We've seen year over year like a 70% decline of interest from investors to invest in sustainability startups. The attention goes all to AI. Same with corporates that we work with. Like AI leadership, fully focus on that because it might have the biggest impact for them. How could you piggyback on the AI opportunity in the sustainability context that you say maybe together, both of them could have a big impact on business and opportunity from a revenue point of view for new startups?
Who might take that?
Yeah, so there's a few answer that. So firstly, I think every sustainability data startup has this huge opportunity in front of it to harness AI to accelerate its productivity and to accelerate the quality of the product. So I think AI is just table stakes for any sustainability data startup. So that's kind of a given. I think you definitely frame, when you're as a sustainability startup speaking to clients, the framing has to change with the markets. And at the moment, there is a lot of interest in AI, and so framing what you're doing more as solving data problems rather than just solving sustainability problems, and helping connect different pieces of data together within a large company to create value. I think that's important for the sales pitch. And then to the investor presentation, there's always a bit of storytelling. I think every sustainability startup has to tell the story that meets the kind of mood music of the investors at the time. But there's also, this is a period where there will definitely be a shaking out of the sustainability landscape, and companies that have good business models will survive, and companies that don't will shake out. And that's quite common in the VC world. We've lived, if you were raising a crypto startup 5 years ago, you were raising an incredible valuation, and then nobody wanted to fund you, and a small number survived and have built sustainable companies, and a lot haven't. And that's just the nature of the very kind of vibesy VC ecosystem. So I think it's expected, and I think it just means that we'll have fewer companies in the space in a few years' time, but they'll be more resilient and hopefully set up for success in the long term.
I have to imagine that there's massive resource efficiencies that can be captured through supply chains by using AI to optimize the use of those resources, including, for example, in water for cooling in data centers, right? And I know the new big Stargate facility that's being, Stargate, I think that's what it's called, yep, in Abilene, Texas. I believe they're building that enormous facility with a reticulated water system. So once the water gets in there, I think it's 1 million cubic something liters. There's a lot of water, but it's basically a circular system, and I think they're using sort of AI systems to optimize the use of that water. But that's just one example, right? But no doubt there's huge inefficiencies in most industries in the use of natural resources. So how can AI solutions help to optimize that? That would probably double-digit reduce our use of natural resources to start with. So I think that's an enormous opportunity.
And I've seen an opportunity, maybe not a startup opportunity, but the overlap between sustainability and AI, and I hope I'm getting this right, but I think L'Oreal have been working with IBM to look at the formulation of their products. And I think particularly in an environment where we're seeing more and more ingredients being banned in the EU, and that's a good thing for our health. How do you formulate products that are more sustainable, that meet your targets, and that also kind of have the same properties? And that's a brilliant AI question to try and ask. So those are the kinds of, I think, AI is a tool. We discover more and more solutions that we can find with it. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah. I work with a lot of SMEs who, to your point, can't move from their position, so they require resiliency, whether that's in aquaculture or agriculture. I'm curious where you're seeing gaps, either in thinking or in data, to increase their local resiliency.
Can I take that one?
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you asked that question. So we are in the middle of running like an X Prize for tech solutions to help SMEs do an assessment of their nature-related issues in their business, recognizing that they don't have money to spend on consultants, they don't have in-house ecology expertise, and they don't frankly have a lot of time. They're fully focused on running their business. So what we've tried to do is make sure as TNFD that building your nature intelligence as a business is not something that's a luxury item for only the big end of town. Every business in every sector, family-owned farming businesses, small distribution companies, everyone needs to build this capacity to understand how nature's relevant to their business. And so we're in the middle of running a process. We launched it around October last year with a group called Conservation X Labs, who are specialists in running sort of X Prize and Grand Challenge type competitions. And we're now looking for companies to come forward with amazing solutions. I'm sure some of them will be AI enabled to help SMEs figure out very quickly what their nature-related issues might be relevant to their business. and extracting open source data to help them understand what sort of issues they need to be looking at, right? So in the most extreme case, you'd be able to go into sort of a chat GPT type thing. You'd say, I'm in the forestry sector, and here are the locations of my business. What are my likely nature-related issues? And you'd get a chat instant report that would say, based on your locations and your sector, these are the things you need to be thinking about. So we really have to collapse the sort of time and cost barriers to make sure that every business in every sector can be assessing these issues. Because, to your point, if your large downstream customers are coming to you asking information about, how much water are you using and what are you doing about these things, and you can't answer those questions, we don't want that to then be a barrier for access to markets for an SME, right? And or a source in which their customers might say, well, if you can't answer these questions, we're going to go and source from somebody else, right? So we had 380 applications or expressions of interest into this grand challenge process that we launched. We've got about 25, 30 people now scrolling through all of those applications, and we're hoping to announce the winners of that in about April.
Yeah, hi. Many of you manage the fundamental role of nature in kind of the risk management space, but also that a lot of the risks need to be managed at the landscape or ecosystem level, which is very difficult for companies often because they may be a dominant player, but they don't have the levers to manage the entire system or the entire landscape. So are there any lessons there in terms of how you've seen how that can be done effectively, or is there also a business opportunity there for some player to take this role of, managing the risk at the landscape level, which, a particular company may not want to get involved in, or it's too much headache. But is there a model where then some other institution comes in and say, okay, we work with all the other stakeholders in the landscape to help you manage this risk? So maybe some thoughts and ideas from the panel on that. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think we probably have lots. Should we go with specific examples as well, if you can?
Yeah, I can give you one example. So cut flower business, huge global industry. I had the opportunity last year to go to Kenya, to Lake Naivasha, and I met one of the world's largest cut flower operations that ships their flowers on a daily basis to the Amsterdam flower market. They have a huge dependence on water from Lake Naivasha, but they recognize that the lake has many other flower operators and tourism operators, as well as the local community. And so what I was really impressed about when I went there was the lake-wide information sharing that's happening through, it's a sort of a water use coalition, if you like. And they're all sharing information about their use of water on the lake. They share information about water quality issues so that if there's some sort of spike in algal blooms or things, they can share that information quickly. But it really speaks to the need to have these landscape scale or watershed-wide collaborative efforts to address exactly the concern you have. And what was really interesting talking to the managers of the flower farm is how well it's working, how much information's being shared, because they've all got a self-interest in doing it, right? There's the competitive element has disappeared when it comes to sharing information about the lake itself. So just one example, but I think we need to scale those up a lot more around the world, and there are some very good examples like that one which we can draw on.
And I may also add an example. So being in a big company, oftentimes if you look at the sites where we're operating, oftentimes we are the biggest employer or the biggest company. And I have a lot of examples also for water in this case, in a water scarce area near to Bangalore in Nagarjuna, where in this industrial site we decided to build a rainwater retainment facility, also with water filters attached. And intentionally we built it to suffice the needs of the whole community and the whole area, because it made our project in the end more economic, of course. But on the other hand, we are not the only ones in this community who are basically looking for the water. We are not the only ones producing there. There are a lot of people and other businesses in there. So we also aligned and basically build it larger to suffice the need of the whole community. And then it oftentimes works. And there are a lot of other examples also where shared common facilities are just to the benefit of all, and they are not a competitive element in this play.
I think where I've seen examples both in Europe and other countries, they tend to have maybe 4 different sort of groups in them as well. And kind of to Seb's point earlier, you need a funder, and so very often it's a large corporate. You might be the largest operator in that particular landscape as well. But you also need the license to have those conversations with producers, with local communities. So then very often you have a not-for-profit, a conservation organisation, someone like that involved, a wildlife trust in the UK. Local government is another one that would very often be involved, and then often an academic institution, because the monitoring and the measurement, and you want to be able to evidence the benefit. It's not always those 4, but it's something around that I've often seen. In the UK, we tend to work at the catchment scale, and you get those kind of 4 operators. Reckitt, for example, are doing great work in production landscapes for rubber, and they too have not-for-profits. They work with the University of Oxford, and then obviously they're the biggest corporate. So I think people would agree you tend to get those kinds of actors working together, and if you can see more than one corporate working together, all the better. And they're just starting to see that at the moment, but it depends on the industry.
Hi, my name's Andrew Mitchell, and for the last 2 years with Professor John Tobin at Cornell, I've been researching what we call nature business, which are nature opportunities. And I think one of the problems I find with the view of the finance sector is that we tend to have a very narrow view of what nature opportunity is. We tend to look at it mainly through a risk lens and not an opportunity lens. And I think one of the things we need to do is get away from the sort of bees, trees, and farmers approach to nature business and look at it across all sectors. And what we've found is we have in this book, which Tony kindly mentioned, is coming out in March, the Little Book of Nature Business, we have over 80 case studies with a market value today of 235 billion, rising on projections up to 720 billion by 2030. Now, the reason why we can find these is because we're thinking of nature very differently. So whilst the food system is a huge and important part of it, both from production right through to consumption, there's some wonderful innovations in there, of course, things like alternate proteins, changes in logistics, in the production side, things like robot weed killers that are using lasers instead of chemicals to kill plants. That could be hugely disruptive to the phytochemical industry, right through to construction, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and energy and water utilities. And we look at all of those. And there's a lot going on. If you think things like bioplastics, you don't tend to think of that as a nature business, but it is. And a kind of simple test is if you take nature out of the product, do you still have a product? And obviously you don't with bioplastics because they come from nature. So if you look at it differently, I think we can create a much more enticing image of what nature investment looks like in the coming decades. So my question to the panel is, what can you do to try and get that message across? Thank you.
So I can jump in. I couldn't agree more that we need to move beyond bees and trees. One lens I've been thinking about that came to the fore, we've just started engaging with a Chinese financial institution on measuring nature risk. And one thing that struck me through that engagement is at least their perception of how quickly China is starting to move on this agenda. So the 26 to 2030 5-year plan, there's the 12th leg of that plan is Beautiful China, and Beautiful China is about pollution reduction. It's about 30 by 30, and it's about embedding green living into consumption habits and patterns. And my relatively elementary understanding of how Chinese policy plays out is that will now cascade down into local authorities and unleash capital, kind of centralized capital into innovating to unlock that Beautiful China agenda. So I think, to your point, I think there is a really interesting geopolitical lens we could put on the nature opportunity agenda, which is, look, Europe and the West did all of the hard work for climate from the early 2000s of setting up the standards bodies, doing the R&D, subsidizing wind, solar, and batteries, and creating the targets and the momentum and the early R&D to move us towards a net zero future. But then most of the value from solar, wind, battery electric vehicles, battery storage has been captured by by China. And I think if you put that geopolitical lens on the nature agenda, which is we're doing a similar pattern, a lot of the legwork in terms of setting up the frameworks and the standards, subsidizing some of the early R&D into biopesticides, biofertilizers, fungi and recycling technologies is coming from the same parts of the world. But I think we're about to have an avalanche of capital and political will from China again. And so if we create that FOMO and that sense of geopolitical competition on this agenda, that might help accelerate the conversation.
I was just going to add, I was at a workshop in Zurich over the weekend about transformation of the food system, and the question was raised, we've now got a $2 trillion solar industry globally in 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. What if China instigates the same thing around food, right? And they're already dropping their consumption of soya. It's going to have a big impact on Brazil. So I agree. I think this combination of top-down policy clarity, real sense of strategy with induced demand, maybe starting from government and then stimulating R&D spend. We've seen this playbook before, and the question is, where else could that be deployed? And for those of us not in China, how are we going to respond to that, right? If they're going to charge ahead and use the China playbook to great effect, it's going to put everybody else in a fast follower mode if indeed we can keep up, right? So I think we all need to be on the front foot innovating. And I think the other key thing we shouldn't forget is, to the point before, that nature opportunities is about reducing negative impacts but also creating positive impacts. We have to remember we're already outside 7 of 9 planetary boundaries. So just doing less bad is very different from doing good. And we have to, I think, be much bolder in the ideas that we back, and we need to get a lot more venture capital into this space to be funding a lot more ideas. Because getting back within planetary boundaries, our challenge is not staying in planetary boundaries. Our challenge is now getting back inside planetary boundaries, and that, by definition, is going to require much more transformational solutions. And to get to those solutions, we need to take, I think, much more of a venture capital mindset.
Yeah. And just to put on the corporate view on that, so in my division from the beginning, and also now, it never had been a risk mitigation strategy. So sustainable business always and still is one of the biggest growth stories which we have. And it's clearly that we want to grow, and we are growing significantly by, on the same time, reducing our relative impact massively. So we are talking about reducing our relative CO2 consumptions by 30-40%. So and at the same time adding another 500 million or billion of turnover. And this is in the end also the only possibility for me in a big corporate to get funding for this. Only by risk mitigation I will get something, but I will not change something. I will not transform something. I will only transform something if I can clearly show this is a new way of doing business, and I will contribute significantly to top and bottom line.
And that's what's really interesting for businesses, right? I mean, how do we change this? I think we talk much more about opportunities, just as you said. I think you made my point. No one wants to hear about risk, and necessarily. I mean, it's very doom and gloom, and I think maybe we made that mistake a bit with climate as well. You notice I didn't start with any slides about the biodiversity crisis, because I think we know. It's what's more is about what is the opportunity, and I think that's what excites people. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much for the fascinating discussion. I wanted to kind of go back to basics and revisit the TNFD framework. So it's a question for Peter. If we think about these 4 pillars that we have in TNFD around risk management, business strategy, and so on, and then also this location-based approach, I wanted to understand how much of an effort was it for you to actually go through that framework? What recommendations you have for other companies to get started on it? And then I also wondered, because you talk a lot about supply chains, how do you actually encourage your suppliers to move towards using that framework?
Well, overall, I cannot tell you how many hours in the end we have spent, because as a big company, you have to basically dedicate the tasks to the individual sites, and we have responsible. So we put it in our overall framework. And as always, it is effort you have to spend in the beginning. You have to have management support, and then you have to put it in regular living in the end. It just looking the development over the last years, I cannot say that it really it increased our SG&A in this area. So in the end, it was about integrating it and then living it, and this was really worth the effort. So if I would be an individual site responsible, I could mayhaps tell you a little bit more about examples. But I can tell you it worked seamlessly with our overall processes. You can integrate it, especially if you are already a corporate with processes set up. And then what was the second question again? How do we encourage our suppliers? Well, in the end, it is oftentimes that we try to be or set a positive example, and to show also to our suppliers, well, it might be an effort at the beginning, but then it turns out to be beneficial in a lot of direct and indirect measures, also mayhaps for your financial rating. And then in the next step, we make it voluntarily that we requested. And next step, we give a penalty if they are doing not accordingly. And mostly when I start the discussion, I will tell them, well, today, nobody is talking anymore about ISO certification, because it was also in the past something that you have to get your sites certified according to certain standards. This was also initial effort. In the meantime, it's just your license to operate. You will not be able to offer anything anymore. And nature and sustainability will become increasingly our license to operate. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody in the end knows about the planetary boundaries. So the question for my suppliers is, do you want to wait until we force you and then you have to rush and it gets much more expensive? Or do you do it now on a step-by-step approach and it gets much less painful? And this normally helps then by increasingly step-by-step to have it first voluntarily, also give some suppliers the stage if they really did it very well. In this kind of supplier forum, you can put away prices. Then you make it a little bit more mandatory and have a penalty if you do not, and then you made it just mandatory. But from the beginning, tell the story about that. This is not a one-time thing. This is not some extra loop they have to do it. It's just part of how we will do business in the future. So we will do it together. We will also support. We will provide examples. And then we can see that step by step, some smaller and a lot of bigger companies are moving, and this creates then the momentum.
If I just add one thing to that, which is we've done tens of TNFD, you've probably seen hundreds reports now, and the aim of the TNFD process shouldn't be to create a pretty report at the end. The aim of the process is to have a business-wide understanding of impacts, dependencies, risks, and embedding that data into relevant functions so that it can lead to some form of change and hopefully capture value for the planet and for nature. So to do that, I think the data quality does matter. Having data that is specific to where you're operating and how you're operating so that you can with confidence take that to the procurement team and ask them to start changing their procurement direction. Or you can take it with confidence to the risk management team and make a business case to invest in a meaningful mitigation measure. I think having that level of granularity and specificity matters, and I think the world is moving in that direction. If we look at the year after TNFD was released, the first reports used a lot of country average data and industry average data, and that was indicatively correct, but often not strong enough to go and unlock resources to actually do anything internally. So we're moving in that direction, higher quality data, more specific to where you operate, how you operate, and wiring it into procurement, risk management, maybe finance, and that's progress.
I'm not sure where the microphones are, but we've got one over here question and one in the front.
So sorry, I joined late, but based on what I've heard, quite insightful. My question for the panel would be that, probably linking back to the startup topic, that sustainability was a big thing for the last few years and not anymore a boardroom topic. Do you see the trade-offs emerging where the boards and the executive leadership is questioning how much to focus, and is it actually the right thing to do and the good thing to do moving forward as well? Or do you see the tensions and the trade-offs emerging now?
So one of our big successes of last year is we published a guide called Asking Better Questions on Nature for Boards. And this thing took off. So it was fantastic. We had a lot of input from board associations around the world. And we had a number of individual board directors contribute to it. And it's really sparked a lot of conversations. In fact, just yesterday here at Davos, I met a CSO of a big European listed company who is publishing their next TNFD report next month, but said, I used your board guide last year, and it really catalyzed a different conversation amongst the board. So as a result of that, we're now in the process of producing Asking Better Questions on Nature for legal counsel, Asking Better Questions on Nature for asset managers. And the idea is to frame up and very simply distill this all down into sort of what are 10 or 12 questions that key decision makers should be asking themselves and asking each others to get on this agenda and to move their organizations forward. And so we've been really happy with the response to the board guide. And what we're seeing is that board directors are finding it, they're hearing about it through Chapter 0 or some other member association they're part of, taking it into the boardroom and starting a conversation. And frankly, that's what we need, and we need every company to be doing that. I was in India last year where we did a session on this guide in front of the Indian Association of Directors, and it was, you could see the light bulbs going on in the room. So it was really fantastic, and we're hoping to see more boards engage on this topic. And it starts with them, every board director has their own fiduciary responsibility, right? So it starts with asking the questions of yourself. How do I equip my fiduciary responsibilities? What questions do I need to be asking of management? So we've now equipped people with a set of questions to get that process started.
We might have time for one very brief question left. I think you were waiting.
I just wanted to go quickly back to what you were all talking about earlier about ROI, sort of thinking about the need for short-term ROI versus the long-term stuff that we know is connected to the implementation of certain like nature-based solutions. So thinking about from a food and bev perspective, like how are you framing or how have you seen people talking about ROI in the short term in terms of just looking at carbon or like the interventions that we know have immediate payback on a farm versus the unpredictability of tipping points and assigning economic value to things like generating social capital and reputational capital, those types of things.
So I can have an opening go. One case study that's been very powerful in the food and bev industry was the cocoa price shock of 24 and that big unexpected increase. And you saw a different reaction from companies that had invested in long-term partnerships in their supply chains for cocoa being more sheltered than folks who were just buying on the spot market and having that really erode their margins. So I think that price shock has helped generate the evidence for work in key commodities that food and bev companies might be exposed to, and start to think about, okay, understanding what are the big nature-related risks with that commodity, what are the potential availability or price shocks that we might face, and how can we start to engage at the landscape level or at intermediary suppliers to mitigate that shock in the short term. So that's one, I guess, short-term business case that I found to be quite powerful. And then I think the broader regen ag business case sits in the medium-term bucket. There was a piece of research I'm sure you're familiar with, I think BCG did in the US, saying there's a 5-year payback at the farm level on regen ag investments. And so my sense is the big food and bev companies, the big challenge now is how do we finance that 5-year transition to enable those investments to happen. So that's also in the medium term. That's not really long term, that's medium term, but still achievable.
And Peter, did you want to come in on ROI for some of the projects that you've been looking at?
Well, I'm not too much into food and beverage in this case, but looking at my company, at my division, yes, we are looking at it of an R&I perspective. Generally speaking, you have a lot of ideas, and then you rate them, and of course you will start with those who are the fastest in payback. But we are looking especially in automotive, we are quite used to have disruptive shocks due to earthquakes or whatever. So constantly we are seeing that. So we always also have these kind of equations about what would be the costs if we are not getting more independent on this. So this you cannot hardly measure into an ROI, but it is taken into account. So yet, I don't know how to include it, but there's also a threshold which you have to basically jump over to be considered. But then it might be if the one is 2 and the other is 5, we might still go for the 5 years if it's beneficial from a risk management and a resilience point of view.
Interesting. So ROI is not necessarily everything.
It is a necessary condition, but it's not the final determination.
I think we are out of time for questions, so thank you so much for all of your questions and to my panel for the discussion as well. I wanted to share in our last few seconds at some point a slide which just has some links to some resources that you might find useful. Here. So on the left-hand side, this is a TNFD paper that we were talking about at the beginning, talking about opportunities for business and nature. It's a fantastic paper. Seaweed. And a picture of seaweed on the front. Business for Nature have also done some excellent work looking at specific cases of opportunities for business. The World Economic Forum have also been doing some fantastic work, sector-specific work on transitions as well, nature-positive transitions. And then at Natcap as well, we're working with colleagues at the London School of Economics to bring together some deeper case studies on how businesses have been able to show positive outcomes for nature and positive outcomes for business as well. There are lots of people looking for case studies because it's one of those things that drives action. So if you're aware of some, if you are working on something that you're very proud of and you want to be showcased, please reach out to us. And my email is there, and we'd love to speak to you. But finally, thank you again to my panelists and for a very interesting discussion, and to you as well.
Thank you, Beccy, Peter, Sebastian, and Tony. That was very, very informative and inspiring, and I think that we experienced the spirit of dialogue. That's the theme of this year's World Economic Forum. I let you take seats now. We have a short activation to do with you, my dear audience. I did give you a pre-warning. We did the intro. So we heard about nature and economics and finance at various different levels. And I learned a lot. I got a lot of inspiration from you, from tax incentives to accountability mechanisms to standards. But if there's one big takeaway from this session, I would say it's about creating FOMO. So Sebastian, thank you for that. And that leads me back to you. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. It's moving now. So my question to you in audience and also people watching the live stream is that what did this session move in you? We all have different roles, privately and professionally. And I would like to encourage you to write down one commitment, one movement. What is it that you are going to start, stop, or continue after today's session? And we will hand out post-its and markers. And those watching live stream, you can write down and send us a quick message to Green Up. What is your commitment that you would like to do? What is in your circle of influence you can have impact on, and how you can take action? And we have, and this can be big or small. And we talked about or heard about supply chain. We heard about the carbon tunnel vision. We talked about venture capitalism mindset. It can be big or small. And we have 2 places for you to place these post-its. When you exit the theater, then in the foyer, we have a connection window. So on your right side, you will find a window where you can put that post-it on, or you can go to our connection book where you can write down your idea, your commitment, your question, your need. Perhaps you have an offering to share, because this space is about connections. Good. And to give you some inspiration, we have Roland here. So I said I'm not here alone. I'm here with Roland Siegenthaler, our live illustrator. And I sat next to him and got a sneak peek of what he captured visually from this session. We heard about fungi and we heard about seaweed. Well, I saw a carrot. So let's see what Roland has captured, and this should give you some more tangible and something very concrete inspiration. Stage is yours, Roland.
A presentation full of vegetable and fruit. Here we go. Yeah, hey, thanks that I could join this super interesting session. Page down. And Maya Sina gave us a warm welcome early in the morning in the best mood. And yeah, I think the early birds were highly rewarded with new thought, and no worm was harmed in that process. Yeah, and Beccy gave us sort of a tour. What can we do if we sort of access that nature potential? Yeah, we can actually sort of like extract business. I had an apple first that looked a bit too much like Adam and Eve. So I replaced it with a pear. It's, yeah, how can we do business with nature? How can we get more efficiency into our processes? How can we get more resilience into our supply chain? And how, for example, can we replace fossil sources with plant-based pigments, for example? And yeah, and in contrast to the omnipresent AI, we could bring in some nature intelligence. And Sebastian asked into the audience, I said, yeah, how can we move that donkey forward? Sort of, we're pulling, and there's sort of a stick and legislation. But how can we, for example, the audience suggested tax incentives? That really would help. Because instead, actually, of incentivizing people or companies who make people sick and cause high health costs, we could actually incentivizing those who sort of, yeah, turn that ship around and get climate and nature positive. And Tony then brought a story about, you know, the next tire for your electric Lamborghini is not made out of dinosaur remains, it's made out of seaweed and fungi. For details, I refer to Tony. That's the plan. And actually, there's quite a quick return. Actually, the fungi grow so quickly, and so does your investment. So it's really a great opportunity. But actually, you know, being first to retrieve that sort of treasure, that's always a good idea. But no one wants to be the pioneer. So yeah, we work on that dilemma. And Peter said, yeah, probably educate people at Bosch how they could create housing for the next drill that is based on plant-based materials. And things are not linear. We learned it in school in a boring French lesson when, you know, there's actually, if you're swinging on your chair, there's a tipping point and it's painful. And actually, you know, nature and water is not just a subject you should care if you produce an energy drink. It's actually a topic that we all should care about. Because actually, you know, moving is not that easy if we screw up our place. And yeah, it's hard. I mean, AI is taking off rapidly, and they're building more semiconductor factories in areas with scarce water. Yeah, and how can we show them the figures that this is probably not such a good idea? And the problem is that some say, yeah, the risk is sort of easy, the risk is incredible, and the risk is sort of somewhere in between, a good compromise. But we want sort of reliable figures, that there's sort of a common answer. And yeah, we should all ask ourselves, how is actually nature affecting our business, our strawberries or our skiing resort or whatever you are doing? And actually working together and exchanging information can be very beneficial for all of them, like the story and example for our Valentine flowers from Kenya showed us, that if they exchange information, it's really a win-win. Yeah, and there was actually a suggestion we should probably move from sort of bees and trees to, we can do AI too in nature, for example, with your investment in that weeding robot project. Yeah, and probably we save some money or get some money. We just got to sort of reframe it. Instead of sustainability, it's now AI-powered sustainability, and yeah, you're getting shitloads of money, I hope, or just enough to get yeah, the planet healthy again. Thank you very much for this rich inspiration.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you so much. And considering the amount of phones that we're taking out, I think you're going to go viral now. Thank you all for this session, our guests and speakers. This was really inspiring. Thank you, Roland. Let's not stop at these ideas and inspirations. Let's take action. We warmly welcome you to join us later this week and enjoy some good beverages and food, plant-based food, in our Good Food Bar in the foyer. Thank you again, and see you soon.